One of the biggest misconceptions heading into the season for the Washington Commanders is that new offensive coordinator Kliff Kingsbury is going to throw the cover off the ball. That simply is not true unless he has to. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, and we are free and available for you to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDays.com, and I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. I greatly appreciate you for coming through for this Monday episode. Every dayers, greatly appreciate you for coming through every single day. On today's episode, we are going to talk about Joe Whitt Jr.'s intensity, why it might remind some people about Eric Bieniemy, but in reality, it's much, much different. We're also going to talk about today's offense versus yesterday's offense, all in part of our conversation about answering the question, is Kliff Kingsbury's offense potentially going to be run first with a rookie quarterback, or will it be pass heavy the way that a lot of the national media expects? Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers, you get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's a bump from the last offer. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started on that today. Of course, if you want to discuss anything we talk about in this episode or anything else Washington Commanders related, all you have to do is text me, and you can do that by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. From there, become a Locked On Commanders insider, and you can text me your thoughts, questions, reactions, discussion pieces, whatever it is that you want to send me. We'll get news, analysis, content, and more from me during games, practices, press conferences, and in between time. No hashtags, no downloads, no apps, just straight to your text message app. You send text messages straight to me as well. Again, join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to get in on that today. And of course, all the new insiders we've gained over the last week or so, welcome to the program. Hope you get everything that you want out of it and more. So today's episode, we're looking to answer the question, is Kliff Kingsbury's offense going to be more run first with a rookie quarterback, Jayden Daniels, at the under center? At least we assume he'll be under center to start the regular season. Of course, that is not necessarily a foregone conclusion. It's just something that most of us are kind of carrying in with us throughout the OTAs and into the minicamp this week and everything else. Marcus Mariota, for all intents and purposes, is QB number one right now, although there's no depth chart and no official announcement of that. But this came through a question in our mailbag episode from Merle last week, and I saved it for another episode to do because I knew this was going to take more than half of the episode, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So Merle's question was, I know Kliff Kingsbury likes to throw the ball. Dan Quinn is a defensive coach. So could the offense be run first, especially with a rookie quarterback? Now, here's the solution, or here's the summary, the resolution that I've come up with after dumping all these numbers and going through all this data. No, it's not going to be run first, but it's not going to be as pass heavy as the national media would have you believe. I think most of the local media, at least the local media that's on ground, with guys like me, your John Kimes of ESPN, the Washington Post guys, the Athletic, Bowie TV, all those guys, I think that most of us have an understanding that there's going to be a healthy amount of run involved in a Kliff Kingsbury offense, but this is still a passing league. Kliff Kingsbury does come from an air raid history, and he's not immune to the fact that this is a passing league. Dan Quinn wants to throw the ball as well. Explosive passes are just as effective as explosive runs. You want as many of those as you can get as well. So what I did to kind of come to this solution or to this conclusion that no, I don't think Kliff Kingsbury's offense is going to be run first, but I also don't think it's going to be as pass heavy as other people believe it is I literally went through and I dumped every single season of data from Kliff Kingsbury's offense. It started from 2019 to 2022 when he was the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. And I will tell you that the differences here are kind of astounding. Like in 2019, when his team was up by 8 points or more, in 2019, he threw the ball. He called pass plays the 25th most in the National Football League. So he was near the bottom of the league. In 2020, in that same situation, when the Cardinals were up eight or more points, that rose to 13th most in the NFL. In 2021, all the way up to second most in the NFL, really tried to unleash the passing game that year. But then in 2022, went back down to 26th in the NFL. So there's obviously some contextual things in there that we have to talk about. And really the most important time, I think, in Kliff Kingsbury's career is the first year. So that's the one I really want to hammer home and really dive into contextually to show you why I got the answer that I did. So in 2019, Kyler Murray was a rookie. Kliff Kingsbury was a rookie head coach. So there is a little bit of a grain of salt here to be taken because Kliff Kingsbury has obviously learned a lot over the last, his 4 full seasons as an NFL head coach, but then also taking a step away from the game, going to USC. He's not going to be the same coach he was in 2019. So there is that grain of salt here. But at the same time, this is the only time. 2019 is the only season that you can look at Kliff Kingsbury and say, what might he do with a rookie quarterback? More importantly, what might he do with a rookie quarterback that can run the ball himself and kind of be part of his own rushing attack? I think that's a very significant part of the context here. So in 2019, Kyler Murray's rookie season, the Arizona Cardinals were 25th in the NFL in pass attempts when leading by 8 points or more. So again, near the bottom of the league when they're leading by 8 points or more. However, they were 12th in the league when leading by 4 to 7. So 1 score lead, more than a field goal, but a touchdown or less. 25th when leading by 1 to 3. So a lead to a field goal lead. 26th when tied. 32nd when trailing by 1 to 3. 9th when trailing by 4 to 7. 10th when trailing by 8. So obviously when you're behind, you're passing more. When you're ahead, you want to go ahead and protect the ball and protect the lead, try to drain the clock. But I think most people, given Kliff Kingsbury's history and his reputation, would expect those rankings when his team is leading to be higher than 25th, 26th, or even 32nd when trailing minimally. So I think that right off the cuff is a little bit of a surprise to the national media who doesn't necessarily, who again, I'm still hearing, even though Kliff in his own introductory press conference told us his offense is not air raid offense. And I know I myself have reiterated that. I myself have pointed out evidence to talk about that. I know other members of this beat have done the same thing, yet people outside of Washington still want to look at this offense like it's going to be just a straight up air raid, throw the pigskin cover off the football type of offense. So the big takeaway here is Kliff Kingsbury in 2019 never really tried to put all the pressure on his rookie quarterback. The team's 2 leading running backs that year averaged a combined 22.6 carries per game. Of course, the team only won 5 games, but in them, Murray attempted more than 25 passes only twice. And in both of those, the opponent scored at least 20 points. So there's a little bit of context there. Within the game flow, the defense giving up a decent amount of points. So let's look at those game flows in depth here to really examine what Kliff Kingsbury did the last time he had a rookie quarterback. In a Week 5 win over the Bengals, they won the game on a last-second field goal by Zane Gonzalez. So this is a game that's very contentious all the way to the final whistle, right? The Cardinals led by 7 at the half. Murray attempted a total of 32 passes, 19 of those in the first half, 13 in the second half. The Cardinals running backs ran 26 times. So with the game close, again, Kliff Kingsbury showed in that game specifically, I want my quarterback to throw the ball, but you look at the second half, we're coming down to a game that's going to end up being won by a last-second field goal. He threw the ball 6 times fewer in the second half than he did the first half. Came out of the second half and said, let's control the game. Let's lean on our run game. Week 6 win against the Atlanta Falcons. The Cardinals' final possession, they were up 1 with 1:53 remaining, had to drain the clock. Kyler Murray attempted 37 passes. Again, this is a 34-33 win. So this is a very high-scoring contest. He threw 19 passes in the first half, 18 in the second, a very even split in the drop back section for Kyler Murray. The Cardinals led by 10 at halftime. The Falcons tied the game at 27 with 10 minutes and 50 seconds left in the fourth quarter, and 14 of Kyler Murray's second half passes came before that game was tied. Meanwhile, the Arizona Cardinals ran the ball 17 times. So this is a game, again, in context, Kliff Kingsbury says, we're winning, we're leading, but my defense is not stopping the opponent. We've got to keep the foot on the gas pedal. So you see there, he has Kyler Murray throwing a little bit more. Week 7 win against the Giants, the Cardinals never trailed. They led by 3 at the half, but Kyler Murray only attempted 21 passes. 17 of those came in the first half. Even though the Giants trimmed the lead to just 3 with over 8 minutes left in the game, Kyler Murray only threw 2 passes after that point. The Cardinals' backs, meanwhile, ran 28 times. So again, the context here, Kliff Kingsbury sees his defense is not giving up a ton of points. His offense is in fairly good control. We can minimize the risk that we put our quarterback in. Week 15 win against Cleveland Browns. The Cardinals, again, never trailed, led by 11 at halftime. Murray only threw 25 passes, 15 in the first, 10 in the second. The game was never really close. and the Cardinals backs ran 25 times. Week 16 win against the Seahawks. The Cardinals trailed or were tied until 4:16 left in the second half or the second quarter, and Murray threw the ball 16 times. The Cardinals led by 10 at halftime, and Murray threw 2 more passes the entire rest of the game. The Arizona Cardinals ran 28 times. Even in a 5-win season, Kyler Murray only hit 40 or more throws 5 times. Sam Howell last year did it 8 times in a 4-win season and had 39 or more in 9 of those games. So the last time we saw Washington roll out with what was essentially a rookie quarterback was last year. So I'm telling you, Kliff Kingsbury's handling of a first-year quarterback starter looks much different, but you got to look beyond the per-game averages in order to see that. So we're going to talk about those big pass games, and we're going to talk about that comparison next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers to FanDuel can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 that you can then use to bet on everything from the finals MVP to who is going to hit one out of the Major League Baseball park. Game 3 of the NBA Finals will be Wednesday night as the series shifts to Dallas for the Mavericks to host the Celtics after playing the first 2 games in Boston. And the Celtics have been favored in every game along the way, so we'll see if that trend stays true heading into Wednesday night. In the NHL, Stanley Cup Finals Game 2 between the Edmonton Oilers and the Florida Panthers is Monday night, and the Panthers are 1.5 goal favorites to take a 2-0 lead in that series. And you can get plus 135 odds for Zach Hyman to score a goal for the Oilers, or plus 140 odds for Sam Reinhart to score for Florida, and many other individual prop bets all over at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sports. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listener, your first view today and every day, everydayers. Thanks for coming through. Make sure you come back tomorrow. We'll have another episode, at least part of which we're going to do a primer. What do we want to see from the week's mandatory mini camp coming up Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of this week? Probably just Tuesday, Wednesday. A lot of times teams give their players that Thursday off, or at least do light work that the media is not invited to see. So make sure you come back for that. We'll talk about that. And then, of course, we'll get into all the mini camp practices as the week progresses. In the meantime, make sure you're also checking out Locked On Sports Today, the first 24/7 sports streaming channel on YouTube, live streaming channel on YouTube that gives you analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we're continuing this conversation about Kliff Kingsbury and whether or not his offense might be run heavy, run first, given the fact that he's got a rookie quarterback in Jane Daniels. And I kind of added a little bit, that question coming from Merle, I added a little bit of, or is it going to be more towards the pass heavy air raid style that a lot of the national media is expecting because Kliff Kingsbury is the offensive quarterback, or offensive coordinator. So we talked about some scenarios here from that 2019 Cardinals season where Kyler Murray was a mobile quarterback, rookie quarterback, similar to what Kliff Kingsbury is dealing with in Washington with Jaden Daniels. And I showed you some examples of times where, look, the Arizona Cardinals were in some tight contests, right? 30-plus point win over one opponent. You see that Kyler Murray throws the ball a little bit more. Against the Detroit Lions going into overtime and ultimately resulting in a tie. At one point in time, the Cardinals are down 2+ touchdowns. They've got to come back in the second half. So they do that on the arm of Kyler Murray. They get into overtime. So they kind of rely on Kyler Murray's arm to try to get them to win. They end up coming through with a tie. And that's kind of one of those big examples of a time where, yes, you could see Kliff Kingsbury have Jaden Daniels put the ball up a lot in the coming season because of context, right? Against the Detroit Lions in that week 1 tie of 2019, Kyler Murray threw the ball 54 times. It's because the team fell behind. They stayed behind. The running game wasn't effective. The defense was giving up a lot of points. They had to catch up. At the end of the day, the team is always going to do what's necessary to try to catch up and win if they are trailing. They're not going to sit back and say, oh, man, we're getting blown out by 14 in the second quarter, but we got a young quarterback out there, so let's go ahead and just run the ball and take the L. No, they're going to go out there and try to be competitive. You've got a whole bunch of other guys, not just the quarterback, putting their bodies on the line. You can't go out there and say, hey, guys, give me your hardest effort, but we're going to lose this game because we don't want to put the quarterback at risk. You can't do that. It's just not feasible. And Arizona's biggest loss, again, 31-9 against the New Orleans Saints in week 9 of that same season. Kyler Murray threw the ball 33 times. The Arizona Cardinals backs only ran the ball 8 times. Why? Because the New Orleans Saints were, for the most part, in control of that game throughout the duration. So they had a 4-point halftime lead, but he had to throw the ball 19 times, one of the few times that we looked at where Kyler Murray threw the ball more in the second half than he did in the first, because the New Orleans Saints ended up opening up a 22-point margin of victory. So you have to have an elevation in passing in the second half if that's happening on the other side of the ball. It's just part of it. So I'm not telling you that Kliff Kingsbury is just going to run the ball, which is why I know he's not going to be run first. But again, if the Commanders can get some leads, if the defense can keep the point differential low, keep the opponent from scoring much more than 20 points in a game, Kliff Kingsbury has shown already a history of running the ball as much as possible, especially with a rookie quarterback in there. Now, that's where I think we need to talk about last year. And I'm not trying to make this a Kliff Kingsbury versus Eric Bieniemy thing, because that's not what this is about. But 2023, last year, is basically the last time we saw a quote-unquote rookie quarterback. Eric Bieniemy, remember last year, kept saying Sam Howell is essentially a rookie quarterback last year. So that's basically the last time we saw Washington run a rookie quarterback out, when the game was one score or less away. So trailing by 7 all the way up to leading by 7. Sam Howell dropped back last year 433 times, 25.5 times per game on average. When the Cardinals were in the same contextual situation in 2019, Kyler Murray dropped back 386 times, which is 24.1 times per game. Again, one game less in the regular season, which is about a 1.5 drop back less per game average for Kyler Murray under Kliff Kingsbury than Sam Howell under Eric Bieniemy. Now, if you're looking at that number, you're saying, bro, 1.5 dropbacks fewer per game is really not that much. You're 100% correct. But when you add in the context of who your quarterback is, again, remember, Kyler Murray has the opportunity or the ability to be a threat in the running game by himself. Sam Howell, listen, Sam Howell wasn't a statue. He's not a statue. He's not Tom Brady, but he's not Kyler Murray, and he's not Jaden Daniels when it comes to the amount of athleticism and running attack threat that he can be alone as a quarterback. So when you're talking about the fact that you have one coach who has an athletic threat on the ground, threat with his legs type of quarterback as a rookie, and he's dropping back 1.5 times less per game when the game is within striking distance of one score on either side of the ball than a quarterback like Sam Howell is, where he's not as dangerous, not as athletic, not as capable of affecting the game as a rusher. To me, that kind of multiplies that 1.5. I'm not going to put a stiff number on it, but having 1.5 fewer, I don't know, man. Like, that's if I were to tell you that Tom Brady runs the ball 1.5 times more per game than Lamar Jackson. It's not that drastic, but there's a significance in the difference there between the two players. So in 2023, the Commanders had 186 non-quarterback runs when the games were within a touchdown. Again, either way, 31st in the NFL, 10.9 carries per game. Now, the Cardinals in 2019, they weren't first. They weren't 15th. They were 25th in the NFL with 190. So still not run first, like bottom line, but not as pass heavy, I think, as a lot of people would expect. Certainly not as pass heavy as we saw last year, even with the game within striking distance of one score. But look at this. 2019, they were 25th in the NFL with 190 non-quarterback runs when the game was within a touchdown. So from trailing by 7 to leading by 7. That's 4 more carries than the Commanders had last season in the same context. The Commanders had an extra game last year. That's significant. So to me, again, Kliff Kingsbury is not going to be near as pass happy as Eric Bieniemy was. So it's not going to be run first, not necessarily, but you're going to see a much more judicious use of the run game under Kingsbury, I believe, than what we saw the last time a quote-unquote rookie quarterback was on the field for Washington. Because, again, that's what Ron Rivera and Eric Bieniemy kept referring to Sam Howell as. So that's the ultimate dive into Kliff Kingsbury. Merle, great question, bro. I don't know if that's what you expected from me when you asked me that question, but that's what you got, which is why I didn't put it in the mailbag episode specifically. I waited to have time in an episode to do it and flesh it out completely and fully. Coming up next, why Joe Whitt Jr.'s style might come across a little bit Eric Bieniemy-like, but it's really a lot different, and it's much more effective. That's next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders with another conversation that, again, this is a much more direct Joe Whitt to Eric Bieniemy comparison. Again, the last one, it's not intended to dog Eric Bieniemy. I'm not trying to spur up people kicking Eric Bieniemy when he's already out of the NFL and all those things. But again, we're looking at what this year's offense could look like versus last year's and why it's going to be different. So it's necessary to bring it up. However, There's another contextual part to this new coaching staff that some people are drawing to Eric Bieniemy. That's the intensity of Joe Whitt Jr. And there are some comparisons floating around out there that it's somewhat like Eric Bieniemy. Now, here's what I would say about it. There's 100 leadership styles in the world, maybe more. Within those, there are 100 variations, maybe more. So when you take Eric Bieniemy, you take Joe Whitt Jr., for example, despite one being on offense, one being on defense, they have some similarities, right? Both of them are very direct. Both of them are very intense types of leaders. One, however, is a yelling version of leadership who's very demonstrative in his leadership, very attention drawing. I don't want to say seeking because I don't honestly think that that's what EB is trying to do is seek attention, but it's very attention grabbing. The other is very commanding and very purposeful, but it's not meant to say, everybody look at me. And again, I don't think EB is doing it from an ego standpoint, but it's just the residual effect of it is everybody has eyes on Eric Bieniemy. So I think that's the start of that conversation of why they're so much different. But the way that defensive end Dorrance Armstrong Jr. described Joe Whitt Jr.'s defensive style is how I describe his leadership personality. I think it's a great way to draw the parallel. Dorrance Armstrong was talking about Coach Whitt and Coach Quinn too, for that matter, their defensive style. And he said, quote, "It's straightforward. It's not difficult, but you got to understand what you're doing in the system. So it's all about the little details as well. Everything plays a part in itself," end quote. That I think is also, that whole statement is a synonym for Joe Whitt Jr.'s leadership style. It's very straightforward. It's not difficult. He's not going to complicate things for you. He's not going to come to you and say, "Hey man, I don't like what you did in that scenario. To fix it, here's an algebra equation and a calculus equation that you need to solve to fix it." No, he's going to say, "Hey man, here's what I don't like. Here's what I want you to do instead. And here's why." Very simplified, very immediate, very direct. I remember asking Joe Whitt Jr. in his introductory press conference, if you have a player that's just not getting it, not getting the play, not getting the call, the check, his assignment, whatever it is, just not getting it, but the effort is there, how do you go about fixing that? And he said, if that whole thing is happening, that is not on the player. That is on the coach. It is my job to make sure that that player understands what it is they're supposed to do. That is different. That is straightforward. That is not difficult. But there is a necessary need for understanding there that Joe Whitt Jr. understands. And it's about the details, man. This guy is about the details. There's a saying that says, don't sweat the small stuff. I'll tell you right now, that only pertains to failures in life, right? If you stub your toe, don't spend the rest of your day being like, man, I stubbed my toe this morning. Don't sweat the small stuff. But if you're completing a task, sweat the small stuff. The devil is in the details, so to speak. So again, everything works in its own context, right? Everything plays a part in itself. So I think the Dorrance Armstrong quote about Dan Quinn and Joe Whitt Jr.'s style is a great transference to Joe Whitt Jr.'s leadership style. Nothing is done without a purpose. With EB, honestly, there were several things done without a purpose. Yelling at players for making mistakes, okay, but the mistakes were made again. Over and over again, we'd see the same mistakes happening on the practice field, and we'd see Eric Bieniemy yelling about them again. Why? Nothing is happening. Nothing is being affected because he was trying to pain them into submission. And I'm going to draw a little parallel to my own personal life, personal and professional life, which works in it because that works in a general sense, right? I remember being a private in the United States Army. One of the first things that they did, which I'm hearing rumors that they're not allowed to do anymore, which is a travesty, it's called a shark attack. And the idea of it is it shakes you away from your civilian roots and shakes you away from every comfort that you ever thought you ever knew and just rocks your world. That's what it's intended to do, quite frankly, is turn you upside down, put you in a state of confusion, put you in a state where you have no idea what's going on because you really don't have any idea what's going on in this new world that you just entered into. It's a culture shock. We need to get you into that culture shock phase as quickly as possible so that we can then start to shape you into this new culture that you're going to learn. Every drill sergeant was part of that. Every drill sergeant was down there screaming down your face, screaming on top of your head, screaming down your back, whatever they're screaming at, they're all out there screaming. But when it came time to get down to the nuances of how to be a soldier, how to complete a task, how to do this, how to do that, whether it was making your bed, how to place your boots under your bed, how to file into the bathroom to shower, you know what I mean? When it was time, when it came time for that, there was moments where they toned it down. All right. I'm going to give an example, a quick story. There was actually a moment where one of my drill sergeants was in our bay and was kind of going through stuff. And this other soldier had non-issued underwear in one of his drawers. drill sergeant lost his mind. That's kind of one of those moments where I'm going to jerk a knot in your butt right now. And I'm going to do it in front of everybody so everybody sees it. And he throws his underwear, and this private's like shaking, right? And like starting to cry and everything. So the drill sergeant's like, what's the matter, private? Private says, those are religious garments. And the drill sergeant immediately, you see his face. Realized he messed up. Said, get the garments, everything kind of froze at that point in time. So they went through the process. What do we need to do to fix it? What do we need to do to clean it properly or replace it? Whatever we need to do to make it work. The moment that I knew in my basic training that my drill sergeants cared about the training that we got was when one of them shed tears over that private shedding tears about what had happened to his religious garments inadvertently. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't on purpose. It wasn't meant to be anything like that. But the bottom line was it happened, and it was significant. And it was not just significant to the private it happened to, because the rest of us are around him and seeing this happening. And so it's a significant moment to all of us. 20 plus years later, I still remember it vividly. That drill sergeant getting emotional about that when he didn't even do it. Like, he wasn't even in the building when it happened. That right then and there, for as much screaming and yelling was happening, as much, whatever was happening, I knew that drill sergeant cared. And I knew the other drill sergeants cared because of the way they reacted to that situation. 8 years later, I'm standing in a shopette. And for those of you who don't know, it's basically a military sheets, but not as good and not as cool. And I'm standing in line, and I hear the most bone-chilling, "How you been, Harrison?" that I've ever heard in my entire life. And it's that drill sergeant, not the one who threw the underwear, but the one who, like I said, got emotional after the fact about it even happening in the first place. He recognized me, standing behind me in line, probably just at most saw the profile on my face at one point in time, recognized me all those years later. This dude gets hundreds of privates a year, and he recognized me. We're wearing the same clothes, obviously, right? Because we're in the Army, so we're all look the same. This is the same dude who would scream like a banshee at us sometimes. But then when it came to get to the overall tone of what was important, when it came time to convey the importance of the message and really develop someone, he brought it down to human levels of communication, because that's what is effective. That's what Joe Whitt Jr. does. That is the difference. So yes, they're both intense. They both are very steely-eyed. They will both have moments with the media where the media tries to ask them some vague question and get them to say something they don't want to say, and they're going to call us out for it. All those things are going to be similar, but these two people's leadership styles could not be any more different. And hopefully I did at least an adequate job of explaining that too. It doesn't mean that this team didn't need a not jerk in their butt last year when EB showed up. I will stand by that. Training camp, all the yelling, all the stuff. Look, they needed a little bit of culture shock there, but it lasted way too long. It was never truly invested in the people. That's part of the problem. And quite honestly, it wasn't supported by the head coach, the top commander of the football operations. All of those things are different now. Everything you see Joe Whitt Jr. do with his intensity, with his boldness, with his directness, it's all intentional. It's all purpose-driven. It's all communicative. It's all invested in the people, and it's supported by the head coach and believed in by the players. So there's a massive difference between Joe Whitt Jr. and Eric Bieniemy's leadership styles. And again, I've seen a few comparisons, so I just want to get that out there where I only had the opportunity to. Coming up tomorrow, again, we're going to talk a little bit about what we expect in this week's mandatory mini camp. In the meantime, if you've got questions or comments, just leave them down below in the YouTube comment section if you're there, or if not, text me directly by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Don't forget, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listener, or first view today and every day. Every day, thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.